The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Mrs. Dorothea Hartley's drawing room, illuminating the assembled ladies in their silk gowns and elaborate bonnets. Charlotte Pemberton stood near the refreshment table, her posture impeccable despite the threadbare quality of her gray muslin dress. She had learned, over these 6 interminable years since her father's death, to hold herself as though she still belonged, even when every woman in the room knew she did not. "Such a pity," a voice carried across the room, deliberately loud. "When people insist on clinging to a station they can no longer afford. One would think pride might yield to practicality." Charlotte's fingers tightened around her teacup. She did not need to turn to identify the speaker. Lady Mary Ann Talbot had once been her closest friend, back when Charlotte's father was alive and their family name still commanded respect. "Indeed," another voice chimed in. "I hear some families allow their poor relations to parade about, pretending nothing has changed. It would be kinder, surely, to help them find appropriate positions. A governess, perhaps, or a companion to an elderly widow." Heat crept up Charlotte's neck, but she kept her gaze fixed on the window overlooking the garden. Through the glass, she could see autumn leaves skittering across the manicured lawn, free, at least, to go where the wind carried them. "Aunt Judith?" A younger woman's voice, uncertain. "Is that not your—" "I'm afraid I don't know to whom you refer." Aunt Judith's crisp tones cut through the room. "I have no relations present today." The silence that followed was exquisite in its cruelty. Charlotte set down her cup with deliberate care, the china clicking softly against the saucer. She turned, met her aunt's cold stare across the room, and offered a small curtsy to Mrs. Hartley. "Thank you for your hospitality," she said, her voice steady. "I find I must take my leave." She walked to the door with measured steps, spine straight, chin high. Only when she reached the street outside, when the door clicked shut behind her and the afternoon air hit her face, did she allow her composure to crack. Not tears. She had none left for society's casual cruelties. But her hands trembled as she pulled her thin shawl tighter against the October chill. 6 years ago, I rejected 3 proposals, she thought, beginning the long walk back to Clerkenwell. I thought I had time. I thought I mattered. The modest townhouse she now called home sat in a neighborhood far removed from the elegant squares of Mayfair. Aunt Judith had taken her in, not out of affection, Charlotte understood, but out of duty and the faint hope that Charlotte might eventually secure a marriage that would restore some fragment of the family's reputation. That hope, Charlotte suspected, had finally expired today. She found her aunt in the cramped sitting room, already returned, and settled in her chair with a glass of sherry. "Your dramatics were unnecessary," Aunt Judith said without preamble. "Though I suppose one must expect such behavior from a woman who squandered her prospects." Charlotte removed her bonnet, setting it on the side table with careful precision. "Was there something you wished to discuss, Aunt?" "Mr. Davies called this morning, the solicitor." Aunt Judith's lips pursed. "He has a proposal. A client of his, a widower of some means, seeks a practical arrangement. A marriage of convenience." The words settled over Charlotte like a heavy blanket, smothering and inescapable. "A merchant," her aunt continued, her tone making clear what she thought of such a match. "No family to speak of, but he's made his fortune in trade. Imports, I believe. He requires a wife to manage his household and provide respectability for his business dealings. You would have security, a home." She paused, then added with particular emphasis, "And I would have my house to myself once more." Charlotte moved to the window, looking out at the narrow street below. A cart rattled past, the driver calling out to his horse. Ordinary life, continuing regardless of the small tragedies unfolding behind closed doors. "What does he offer?" she asked quietly. "Respectability. Comfort. More than you have any right to expect at your age and in your circumstances." At 26, with no dowry, no prospects, and a family name tainted by scandal. Charlotte did not need the words spoken aloud. She lived with that truth every waking moment. When does Mr. Davies wish to meet? Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Aunt Judith's voice softened, just fractionally. I know this is not what you dreamed of, Charlotte, but dreams are luxuries for women with choices. The offices of Edmund Davies, solicitor, occupied the ground floor of a respectable building near Lincoln's Inn. Rain had begun to fall as Charlotte made her way there the following afternoon, turning the cobblestones slick and reflective. She arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, her second-best dress brushed and pressed, her hair arranged in a simple knot that spoke of dignity without pretension. Mr. Davies was a compact man with kind eyes and an efficient manner. Miss Pemberton, thank you for coming. Please do sit. My client should arrive momentarily. Charlotte had barely settled into the chair when the door opened again. The man who entered was tall. She noticed that first. With dark hair slightly disheveled from the rain, and eyes that seemed to assess everything with quiet intensity. He wore a well-tailored coat of somber gray, the attire of a successful merchant rather than a gentleman, and carried himself with a composure that suggested he was accustomed to making decisions without consultation. Miss Pemberton, Mr. Davies said, may I present Mr. Adrian Thorne? Adrian Thorne offered a brief bow. Miss Pemberton. His voice was low, controlled, with an edge of formality that matched his bearing. Mr. Thorne. Charlotte studied him as he took the chair, opposite hers. His face was handsome in an austere way, all clean lines and sharp angles. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Gray like a winter sky, observant without being intrusive. There was no cruelty there, she noted with some relief. No condescension, only careful evaluation. I believe Mr. Davies has outlined the nature of my proposal, Adrian said. But I prefer to speak plainly, Miss Pemberton. I require a wife for practical purposes. Someone to manage my household, to provide a respectable social presence when my business interests require it. In return, I offer security, comfort, and respect. I do not offer affection or romantic sentiment. His bluntness was almost refreshing after years of society's veiled insinuations and false politeness. And you believe I am suited to this arrangement? Charlotte asked. I believe you understand the value of honesty and the burden of maintaining appearances when circumstances have shifted. Something in his expression softened, just slightly. Mr. Davies speaks highly of your character and intelligence. Those qualities matter more to me than dowries or connections. Charlotte felt a small, unexpected warmth in her chest. When was the last time someone had valued her intelligence? What are the specific terms? She asked, turning to Mr. Davies. The solicitor cleared his throat and produced a document. A contract of 2 years, with provisions for dissolution or continuation at that time, should both parties agree. Mr. Thorne will provide a household in Clerkenwell, a modest allowance for personal expenses, and funds for household management. You would be expected to oversee the domestic staff, accompany Mr. Thorne to occasional business dinners, and maintain the household accounts. Separate bedrooms, Adrian added, his tone matter of fact. This is a practical arrangement, not a romantic one. I will not impose upon you in that regard. Charlotte appreciated his directness, even as a small, foolish part of her felt the sting of it. She looked down at the contract, the careful legal language blurring slightly before her eyes. May I ask a question, Mr. Thorne? Of course. Why me? Surely there are other women who might welcome such an arrangement. Women with fewer complications. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. Because when Mr. Davies mentioned your name, He also mentioned that you once rejected 3 suitors before your father's death. Women who make choices based on their own judgment, rather than desperation or expectation, interest me more than those who simply accept what is offered. But I am desperate now, Charlotte thought. Yet somehow his words suggested he saw beyond that. Or perhaps that he understood desperation did not erase the person beneath it. She picked up the pen Mr. Davies offered. I have one condition of my own. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Yes? Honesty. You ask for civilized cohabitation without sentiment. I agree. But I will not tolerate deception or false promises. If this arrangement is to be practical, let it be truthfully so. For the first time, Adrian's severe expression shifted into something that might have been the ghost of a smile. Agreed, Miss Pemberton. Honesty. Charlotte signed her name with a steady hand, the scratch of the pen loud in the quiet office. When she set it down, Adrian signed as well, his signature bold and certain. The ceremony will be held next Tuesday, Mr. Davies said. A simple affair at St. George's, with myself and Mr. Thorne's sister as witnesses. Charlotte nodded. She had imagined her wedding so many times as a girl. The flowers, the music, the guests. This would be none of those things. But it would be honest. And at this moment, honesty felt more valuable than all the romantic dreams she had once harbored. As she left the office, stepping back into the rain-damp street, she caught Adrian Thorne watching her through the window. Their eyes met for a brief moment before she turned away. At least, she thought, pulling her shawl close, he does not pretend this is something it is not. The wedding was conducted in less time than it took to read the marriage banns. Charlotte wore a simple blue dress, the best she owned, and carried no flowers. Adrian stood beside her in dark, formal attire, his expression composed and unreadable. Mr. Davies and a woman introduced as Mrs. Beatrice Thorne, Adrian's widowed sister, served as witnesses. The vicar's words washed over Charlotte in a distant murmur, and when Adrian slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, she felt as though she were watching the scene from somewhere outside herself. I now pronounce you man and wife. Adrian did not kiss her. He simply offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked together out of the church into the autumn afternoon. The house in Clerkenwell was far more elegant than Charlotte had anticipated. 3 stories of honey-colored brick, with tall windows and a small but well-maintained garden. Inside, the furnishings spoke of wealth tempered by restraint. Good quality but unpretentious, chosen for comfort rather than display. Mrs. Beatrice Thorne met them in the entrance hall. She was perhaps 5 years older than Adrian, with warm brown eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Charlotte at ease. Welcome, Charlotte, she said, taking Charlotte's hands in her own. I do hope you'll be happy here. Adrian can seem rather severe, but I assure you he has a good heart beneath all that solemnity. Beatrice, Adrian said, a note of warning in his voice. Oh, hush! I'm allowed to embarrass you occasionally. It's what sisters are for. Beatrice smiled at Charlotte. Come, let me show you the house. Adrian, do make yourself useful and have Mrs. Parker prepare tea. As Beatrice led her through the rooms, Charlotte found herself genuinely impressed. The drawing room was tasteful, the dining room intimate rather than ostentatious. But it was the library that made her stop in wonder. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines gleaming in the afternoon light. There must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands. Volumes on history, philosophy, literature, even scientific treatises. Charlotte moved closer, her fingers trailing along the shelves with something close to reverence. Adrian's collection, Beatrice said softly. He spends most of his evenings here. Reading is his preferred escape from the world's noise. Charlotte turned to find Adrian standing in the doorway, watching her. You may use the library whenever you wish, he said. I dislike waste, and books left unread are the worst waste of all. Thank you, Charlotte said, and meant it. In that moment, surrounded by words and ideas, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not hope, precisely, but possibility. That evening, Mrs. Parker showed Charlotte to her room. It was spacious and well-appointed, with a comfortable bed, a writing desk, and windows overlooking the garden. A connecting door stood closed on the far wall. That leads to Mr. Thorne's chamber, Mrs. Parker explained. He asked me to tell you the door will remain locked unless you choose otherwise. He wishes you to feel entirely at ease. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. There was relief in Adrian's consideration, yes, but also, though she barely admitted it to herself, a strange, hollow disappointment. She prepared for bed alone, slipping between cool sheets, staring up at the ceiling. Through the window, she could hear the distant sounds of the city, the life of London continuing around her. She was married now, Mrs. Adrian Thorne. She had security, shelter, a beautiful library full of books. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, Charlotte could not shake the memory of Adrian's words. I do not offer affection or romantic sentiment. She had agreed to those terms. She had signed the contract with her eyes open. So why did they suddenly feel so unbearably lonely? The first weeks of marriage settled into a rhythm as predictable as clockwork. Charlotte woke at dawn, breakfasted alone while Adrian attended to business correspondence, spent her mornings consulting with Mrs. Parker about household matters, and her afternoons in the library. Dinners were formal affairs in the dining room, with Beatrice often joining them to fill the silences with gentle conversation. Adrian was unfailingly polite. He asked after her comfort, ensured she had everything she required, and thanked her when she efficiently resolved a dispute between the cook and the housemaid. But he remained distant, a courteous stranger sharing her home. Charlotte told herself this was exactly what she had agreed to, precisely what she wanted. She almost believed it. 3 weeks into their marriage, something shifted. It began with the curtains. Mrs. Thorne, Adrian said one morning over breakfast, setting down his newspaper, I've been considering refurbishing the drawing room. The current decor is rather oppressive. Would you be willing to review some fabric samples and offer your opinion? Charlotte looked up, startled. You wish for my opinion? You live here as well, he said simply. It seems reasonable to consult you. That afternoon, she spread the samples across the drawing room settee. Heavy damasks in crimson and gold, the sort of ostentatious fabrics favored by men trying to prove their wealth. These are all quite bold, she said carefully when Adrian joined her. You dislike them? I dislike what they represent. Charlotte touched the red damask, then set it aside. Pomposity masquerading as elegance. Adrian's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. And what would you suggest instead? Charlotte hesitated, then retrieved a sample she had set aside. A silk in soft cerulean blue, elegant without being showy. Something like this. It reflects light beautifully, and the color would complement the morning sun. Adrian studied the fabric, then nodded. Excellent choice. Please inform the decorator. After he left, Beatrice appeared in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. What? Charlotte asked. He's never asked anyone's opinion on household matters before, Beatrice said. Not even mine. And I've lived with him for 3 years. Perhaps he simply values practicality. Perhaps. Beatrice's smile widened. Or perhaps, Charlotte, you are not as invisible to my brother as you imagine. The library became their shared sanctuary. Charlotte would settle into the wingback chair by the fire each evening, a book open in her lap, and Adrian would take his customary seat across from her. For the first few nights, they read in companionable silence. Then, gradually, conversation began to weave between them. "You're reading Johnson," Adrian observed one evening, nodding toward her book. "The History of Rasselas," Charlotte confirmed. "Have you read it?" "Years ago. What do you make of the prince's search for happiness?" Charlotte considered. "I think Johnson understood that happiness cannot be pursued directly. It's found in unexpected moments, not grand achievements. A melancholy conclusion, but an honest one." Charlotte met his gaze. "Isn't honesty what we agreed upon?" Something shifted in Adrian's eyes. A spark of what might have been appreciation, or interest, or something deeper. "Indeed we did." Their conversations grew longer, more animated. They debated the merits of Wordsworth versus Byron, discussed the implications of the new railway lines spreading across England, argued good-naturedly about whether Mrs. Radcliffe's novels were brilliant or absurd. One evening, Charlotte laughed at an observation Adrian made about a particularly pompous character in the novel she was reading, a genuine, unguarded laugh that bubbled up before she could contain it. Adrian stopped mid-sentence. He stared at her with an expression she had never seen before, something between wonder and pain. "What is it?" Charlotte asked, her laughter fading. "You?" He shook his head slightly. "You don't perform for me. You don't modulate your reactions to please or impress. You simply are." Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Should I not be?" "No. God, no." Adrian leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense on hers. "It's the most honest thing I've encountered in years." The air between them suddenly felt charged, weighted with unspoken things. Charlotte's heart began to race, an unwelcome, dangerous acceleration. Beatrice rose from her seat across the room with a theatrical sigh. "I find I have a terrible headache. Do excuse me. Good night." She departed with suspicious haste, leaving Charlotte and Adrian alone in the firelit library. The silence stretched, but it was different now. Not comfortable, but thrumming with tension. "Our agreement was for honesty," Adrian said finally, his voice low. "So I should tell you, these evenings have become the hours I most anticipate each day." Charlotte's breath caught. "Adrian, you deserve to know that." He stood abruptly. "Good night, Mrs. Thorne." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and her suddenly racing thoughts. Over the following 2 weeks, something fundamental shifted between them. Adrian began taking his breakfast with her rather than retreating to his study. They walked together in the garden after dinner, discussing everything and nothing. Once, his hand brushed hers as they both reached for the garden gate, and neither pulled away immediately. Charlotte felt herself falling, slowly, inexorably, like a leaf drifting down from a tree. She tried to stop it, to remember that this was a practical arrangement, a contract with terms and conditions. But her heart seemed to have misplaced the paperwork. She caught herself watching him when he read, studying the way concentration softened his usually severe features. She noticed how he always ensured her tea was prepared exactly as she preferred, how he quietly had the library restocked with novels he thought she might enjoy. "I am in love with my husband," she realized one night, alone in her room. How impossibly foolish. The evening it nearly broke was like any other. Charlotte and Adrian sat in the library, a volume of poetry open between them. The fire cast dancing shadows across the walls, and rain tapped gently against the windows. "Listen to this," Adrian said, and began to read. Byron, naturally. His voice transformed the words, gave them weight and music. Charlotte found herself watching his mouth form the syllables, the way his eyes softened as he spoke of love and longing. When he finished, he looked up and found her staring, Neither looked away. "Charlotte," he said very quietly. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The space between them felt both impossibly vast and dangerously narrow. Adrian set the book aside and stood. He crossed to her chair, knelt beside it so they were eye to eye. His hand rose slowly, carefully, to cup her cheek. "May I?" he whispered. She wanted to say yes. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. But some last fragment of self-preservation made her ask, "May you what?" "This." He leaned forward, his intention clear. Charlotte's eyes fluttered closed. She felt his breath against her lips, warm and unsteady. Felt the ghost of contact, barely there. Adrian pulled back sharply, standing so quickly he nearly stumbled. "Forgive me, I shouldn't have—" Charlotte's eyes snapped open. "Why not?" "Because you deserve more than this." He gestured vaguely, his usual composure cracking. "More than a marriage of convenience with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Charlotte stood as well, frustration and confusion making her bold. "What does that even mean?" "It means—" He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture unusually agitated. "I am not what you believe me to be, Charlotte." "Then tell me what you are." "I can't." The anguish in his voice stopped her. "Not yet. Not— God, you deserve the truth, but I'm too much a coward to give it." He left, practically fled, and Charlotte was alone with her racing heart and questions that had no answers. She stood there for a long moment, then slowly sank back into her chair. The fire popped and crackled, indifferent to her confusion. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the glass like 1,000 urgent fingers. "What aren't you telling me, Adrian?" she thought. "And why does it feel like it matters so much?" The next morning, Adrian sent word through Mrs. Parker that urgent business required him to visit his solicitor. He would be gone most of the day. Charlotte told herself she was relieved. The tension between them had become unbearable. She threw herself into household duties, reviewing the accounts, consulting with the cook about menus, organizing the linen closet with more attention than such a task truly warranted. By afternoon, even Mrs. Parker was looking at her with concern. "Mrs. Thorne, perhaps you might rest? You've been at this since dawn." "I'm quite well, Mrs. Parker. I thought Mr. Thorne's study could use organizing. He mentioned the other day that he couldn't locate an important contract." "Oh, the master asked me to help you with that," Mrs. Parker said quickly. "He said you might find the filing system confusing. Let me fetch the key." As Charlotte waited in the study, her gaze drifted over Adrian's desk. It was meticulously organized, everything in its place. But there, barely visible beneath a stack of business correspondence, she spotted the corner of an envelope. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't. But something about it, the quality of the paper, the formal seal, drew her attention. Her hand moved almost of its own accord, sliding the envelope free. The direction was written in elegant script. "The Right Honorable the Earl of Ashford, Ashford House, Derbyshire." Charlotte stared at it, confused. Some business associate of Adrian's, perhaps? But then why keep it here, hidden beneath other papers? She turned it over. The seal had been broken, the letter inside partially visible. She could see the salutation. "My Lord Ashford." Her hands began to tremble. She pulled the letter out fully and read, "My Lord Ashford, pursuant to your instructions regarding the management of your London properties." The words blurred. She read them again. And again. "My Lord Ashford." "Mrs. Thorne?" Mrs. Parker's voice came from the hallway. "I have the— Oh dear." Charlotte looked up to find not Mrs. Parker, but Beatrice standing in the doorway. The older woman's face had gone pale. "Charlotte," Beatrice began, "who is my husband?" Charlotte's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, hollow. Who is Adrian Thorne? Beatrice closed the door softly behind her. You should ask him. I'm asking you. Charlotte held up the letter, her hand shaking. This is addressed to the Earl of Ashford. Is that Adrian? Beatrice closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Yes. The room tilted. Charlotte gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. He's the 7th Earl of Ashford, Beatrice continued quietly. He inherited the title 9 years ago when our father died. But 5 years ago, he renounced public use of it, retreated from society. He still maintains the estates, fulfills the legal responsibilities, but he refuses to use the title socially. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Beatrice moved closer, her expression full of sympathy. He was engaged. Lady Marianne Talbot. Charlotte's head snapped up. Lady Marianne? You know her? She was at the tea. The one who... Charlotte couldn't finish the sentence. The woman who had publicly humiliated her had been Adrian's fiancée? She accepted his proposal, but she never loved him, Beatrice said, her voice hard. She wanted only the title. When she discovered Adrian had unfashionable ideas about marriage, that he believed in genuine partnership, in treating a wife as an intellectual equal, she began mocking him. She shared his private letters with her friends, turned his sentiments into social entertainment. Charlotte felt sick. The betrayal destroyed something in him, Beatrice continued. He withdrew from society entirely, changed his name to simply Mr. Thorne, moved to London, built a new life in trade. He wanted... She paused. He wanted to know if anyone could value him for himself, not his title, not his position. Charlotte looked down at the letter in her hands. All this time, every conversation, every shared evening, every moment she had felt herself falling in love. He had been lying. No, not lying. Hiding. He treated me as though I was beneath him, she said, her voice breaking. All while he was an earl, a peer of the realm, and I was just a burden he took on. A social experiment. That's not true. Beatrice grabbed her hands. Charlotte, I have never seen my brother as happy as he's been these past weeks. You've brought light back into his life. By being ignorant. Charlotte pulled her hands free. By not knowing who he truly was. Did he enjoy it, do you think? Watching the poor, grateful wife fawn over his library and his house, never suspecting she'd married so far above her station. He loves you. The words hit Charlotte like a blow. She stepped back, shaking her head. How can you know that? Because I've watched him, Beatrice said simply. I've seen how he looks at you when you're not aware. How he carefully notes everything you enjoy so he can provide it. How he talks about you when you're not in the room. Charlotte, my brother has never loved anyone the way he loves you. Then why didn't he tell me? The question came out as a sob. Why did he let me believe? She couldn't finish. The pain was too sharp, too overwhelming. All those moments in the library, all those careful conversations. Had he been laughing at her? Pitying her? Testing to see how long it would take her to discover his secret? Charlotte moved toward the door. I need to leave. Charlotte, please. Talk to Adrian when he returns. No. The word came out fierce, final. I can't see him right now. I can't. She fled the study, ran up the stairs to her room. Her hands shook as she packed a small bag, just essentials, enough to survive a few days. She would go to Aunt Judith's. It would be unbearable, but at least there she would know exactly where she stood. As she descended the stairs, Beatrice waited in the hall. Please don't do this, she said softly. You're hurting, but running won't. I'm not running. Charlotte said. I'm refusing to be made a fool of any longer. She walked out into the autumn afternoon, leaving behind the house that had briefly felt like home, the library full of books, and the man she had been foolish enough to love. Aunt Judith's triumphant expression when Charlotte appeared on her doorstep with a traveling bag was almost worse than the pain already crushing Charlotte's chest. I knew it wouldn't last, her aunt said, stepping aside to let her in. A merchant playing at respectability. What did you expect? Charlotte didn't correct her. Didn't explain that Adrian was not a merchant at all, but an earl who had found her so beneath his notice that he couldn't even be bothered to tell her the truth. She spent that night in her old room, smaller and shabbier than she remembered, staring at the ceiling while her mind replayed every conversation, every shared glance, every moment she had thought meant something. I am not what you believe me to be. He had tried to tell her. In his own cowardly way, he had tried. But trying wasn't enough. Honesty was what they had promised each other. Honesty was the foundation of their entire arrangement, and he had built it all on lies. But, a small voice whispered in her mind, did he truly lie? Or did he simply omit? Charlotte rolled over, pressing her face into the pillow. It didn't matter. Lie or omission, the result was the same. She had been deceived. Adrian returned home that evening to find Beatrice waiting in the entrance hall, her expression a mixture of sympathy and reproach. She's gone, Beatrice said without preamble. Adrian went very still. Gone where? Her aunt's house, I presume. She found the letter, Adrian. The one addressed to you as Lord Ashford. The blood drained from Adrian's face. He gripped the banister for support. I need to. She thinks you were toying with her, Beatrice interrupted. Conducting some sort of social experiment. She believes you found her ignorance amusing. That's not. Adrian's voice cracked. She must know that's not true. Everything between us? How would she know? Beatrice's tone was gentle but firm. You never told her the truth, Adrian. You let her believe you were someone you're not. And yes, I understand why. I know what Marianne did to you. But Charlotte is not Marianne. Adrian sank onto the stairs, his head in his hands. I was afraid. If she knew who I was, what I am, you were afraid she would want the title instead of the man. I know. Beatrice sat beside him. But you've lost her anyway. And this time, it's not because someone chose your position over your person. It's because you didn't trust her enough to let her make that choice at all. Adrian looked up at his sister, anguish clear in his eyes. What do I do? You prove to her that she matters more than your fear, Beatrice said simply. You do what you should have done from the beginning. You tell her the truth. All of it. And you let her decide. The note arrived 2 days later, delivered by a footman in formal livery that made Aunt Judith nearly swoon with curiosity. Mrs. Charlotte Thorne is cordially invited to dine at Hartley House this evening at 8 o'clock. Mrs. Dorothea Hartley requests the honor of her presence. Hartley House? Aunt Judith snatched the invitation from Charlotte's hands. But this is... Charlotte, you cannot refuse. This is one of the most prestigious homes in London. If you've somehow secured an invitation... I don't want to go. Charlotte's voice was flat, exhausted. She had barely slept since leaving Adrian's house, had barely eaten. The pain hadn't dulled. If anything, it had sharpened into something almost unbearable. You will go, Aunt Judith said firmly. You will put on your best dress, you will smile, and you will show these people that you have some value, even if your merchant husband turned out to be... He's an earl. Aunt Judith stopped mid-sentence. What? Adrian, Mr. Thorne. He's the Earl of Ashford. He's been hiding it. Charlotte laughed, a bitter sound. So you see, Aunt, I didn't even manage to secure a merchant. I secured an aristocrat who found me so insignificant he couldn't be bothered to mention his title. For once, Aunt Judith was speechless. Charlotte wore her blue dress, the one she had married in. It seemed appropriate somehow. A reminder of the moment she had signed away her freedom for the illusion of security and the unexpected, devastating reality of love. Hartley House blazed with light when she arrived. A servant took her cloak, and Charlotte was ushered into the drawing room, where the same women who had humiliated her weeks ago now stood with champagne glasses and curious eyes. Mrs. Thorne, Mrs. Hartley greeted her warmly, far more warmly than before. How delightful you could join us. We were just discussing the most intriguing rumors. Charlotte barely heard her, because there, standing near the fireplace, was Lady Marianne Talbot. And Lady Marianne's eyes were fixed on the doorway behind Charlotte with an expression of pure shock. Charlotte turned. Adrian stood in the entrance to the drawing room, but this was not the Adrian she knew. He wore formal evening attire, complete with decorations and insignia that proclaimed his rank. His posture was different, straighter, more commanding. He looked every inch the aristocrat he had been born to be. And he was walking directly toward her. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to watch as Adrian crossed the polished floor, his gaze never leaving Charlotte's face. She wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but here, exposed before all these people who had once mocked her. But her feet wouldn't move. Adrian stopped before her. Then, to her absolute shock, to the gasps of everyone assembled, he knelt. "Charlotte," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Before these witnesses, I must speak the truth I should have given you from the beginning." "Adrian, don't," Charlotte whispered, mortified. "My name is Adrian Thorne," he continued as though she hadn't spoken. "7th Earl of Ashford. 5 years ago, I renounced the public use of my title because I had learned that society values position over person, appearance over authenticity. I had been betrayed by someone who wanted only my rank, who made a mockery of my feelings for the entertainment of her friends." Charlotte saw Lady Marianne pale, saw her hand clutch her champagne glass until her knuckles went white. "I thought," Adrian said, his eyes still locked on Charlotte's, "that by hiding who I was, I might finally discover if anyone could value me for myself. And then I met you." Charlotte's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "You signed a contract with a man you believed to be a simple merchant. A practical arrangement, nothing more. But you treated me with honesty and intelligence, and a dignity that had nothing to do with what you thought I could offer you. You laughed at my observations not because you wanted to flatter me, but because you genuinely found them amusing. You challenged me, questioned me, saw me." His voice roughened with emotion. "And I fell in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably. The woman who chose books in blue instead of red because pomposity offended her. The woman who read Byron and argued that happiness cannot be pursued directly. The woman who deserved to know the truth, and whom I was too much a coward to trust with it." A tear escaped down Charlotte's cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "You let me believe. I know what I let you believe. I know what I took from you, the right to choose with full knowledge. And I know I have no right to ask anything of you now." Adrian's voice cracked. "But I am asking anyway. Not as an earl. Not as someone with anything to offer but himself. I am asking you, Charlotte Pemberton. The woman who once rejected 3 proposals because she would not settle. The woman who walked out of a humiliating tea with her head high. The woman who had the courage to marry a stranger for honesty. I am asking if you can forgive me." The silence in the room was absolute. Charlotte could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every stare. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "You made me feel like a fool. I know. You took away my choice. I did. Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. But Charlotte, I need you to understand. I loved you when I thought you saw me as nothing but a merchant. When I believed you could never know what I truly was. I loved you for your mind, your strength, your refusal to pretend. The title, the estates, the position, they mean nothing without you. Charlotte looked down at him, this man who had been her husband for barely 2 months, who had turned her practical arrangement into something devastating and real. The man who had given her a library and asked her opinion and made her laugh and broken her heart. Lady Marianne wanted your title, she said slowly. Is that what you feared from me? Yes. The admission was raw. I was terrified that if you knew, everything between us would change. That you would see the Earl of Ashford instead of simply Adrian. That I would lose the only honest thing I had found in years. But you lost it anyway, Charlotte pointed out. Because you didn't trust me with the truth. I know. Adrian bowed his head. I was a coward and a fool, and I have no right to ask for another chance. But I am asking anyway, because losing you is unbearable, and the thought of spending the rest of my life without you... His voice broke entirely. Charlotte felt something crack open in her chest. All the anger, all the hurt, all the betrayal. It was still there. But beneath it, underneath everything, was the simple, stubborn truth. She loved him. She had loved him when she thought he was nobody. And that was the point, wasn't it? Stand up, she said quietly. Adrian looked up, hope and fear warring in his eyes. Stand up, Adrian. You don't need to kneel to me. You never did. He rose slowly to his feet, and Charlotte reached out to touch his face. The same gesture he had made in the library, the night he had almost kissed her. I loved you, she said, aware of every listening ear but caring only about the man before her. When I thought you were a merchant with a beautiful library and a tendency towards severity. I loved you when you asked my opinion about curtains and debated poetry with me, and looked at me as though I mattered. The title changes nothing about that. Adrian's breath caught. Charlotte! But, she continued, her hand still against his cheek, if we are to have honesty, if we are to have anything real, it must be complete. No more secrets, no more hiding. Can you promise me that? Yes. The word was fervent, desperate. Yes, I promise. Charlotte, I will give you anything, everything. I don't want everything, Charlotte interrupted. I want you, the man who gave me a library and respected my intelligence and made me believe I was worth something again. That man, not the Earl, not the title. You. You have me, Adrian said hoarsely. You've had me since the day you laughed at my observation about pompous Mr. Darcy. Charlotte felt herself smile through her tears. Then I suppose we should try this marriage again. Properly this time. With honesty. With honesty, Adrian agreed. He cupped her face in both hands. May I kiss you now? I've been wanting to since that night in the library, and I think I might die if I have to wait any longer. Yes, Charlotte whispered. He kissed her softly at first, almost reverently, as though she were something precious he feared breaking. But Charlotte pressed closer, her hands fisting in his coat, and the kiss deepened into something real and whole and true. When they finally broke apart, the room erupted into applause and whispers. Charlotte had forgotten entirely that they had an audience. Well, Mrs. Hartley said, fanning herself dramatically. I must say, that was the most romantic thing I have ever witnessed. Charlotte turned to find Lady Marianne standing very still, her face a mask of composure that didn't quite hide her shock. Their eyes met across the room. Charlotte, Marianne began, taking a tentative step forward. I had no idea you were... if I had known, The past is past, Lady Marianne, Charlotte said calmly. She tucked her hand into Adrian's arm. I hope you find what you're looking for someday. True regard, I mean, not just the appearance of it. It was more grace than Marianne deserved, and they both knew it. But Charlotte found she had no interest in cruelty. She had what she wanted. Everything else was simply noise. They left shortly after, despite Mrs. Hartley's protests that they must stay for dinner. Adrian handed Charlotte into his carriage. She noticed for the first time the discreet family crest on the door, and climbed in beside her. Take us home, he called to the driver. Home, Charlotte repeated softly. To Clerkenwell? If that's where you wish to be. Or we could go to Ashford House. Or anywhere else in England. Charlotte, I have properties scattered across 3 counties, and I don't care about any of them. I only care that wherever we are, we're together. Charlotte leaned her head against his shoulder. Clerkenwell, she said. I like our house there. The library is particularly fine. She felt rather than saw his smile. Yes. Though I should warn you, the Earl of Ashford owns an even more extensive library at his estate in Derbyshire. Perhaps we might visit it someday. Perhaps we might. Charlotte laced her fingers through his. Though I'm rather attached to the Earl himself, so he'll have to come along. I think that can be arranged. They rode in comfortable silence for a moment, the city passing by outside the windows. Adrian? Charlotte said quietly. Yes? When did you know? That you loved me? He was quiet for a long moment. That night in the library, when you laughed. I looked at you and I thought, I have never been this content. Not with Marianne, not with anyone. And I realized that for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't hiding or pretending or trying to be someone I wasn't. I was simply myself, and you made me feel as though that was enough. Charlotte turned to look up at him. In the dim light of the carriage, his face was shadowed, but his eyes were clear and honest. It is enough, she said. You are enough. You always were. Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, with the knowledge that they had time now. All the time in the world. 6 months later, spring had come to London, bringing with it warmer winds and the scent of flowers from the parks. Charlotte sat in the library, their library, she had learned to think of it, with a book open in her lap and late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The house in Clerkenwell had remained their primary residence, though they had visited Ashford House in Derbyshire twice. Charlotte had been right about the library there. It was magnificent. But she still preferred this room, with its comfortable chairs and the memories of their courtship woven into every corner. The door opened, and Adrian entered, carrying a stack of correspondence. Anything interesting? Charlotte asked. An invitation to Lady Hartley's summer ball. She's apparently decided we're the most romantic couple in London, and must be displayed at every opportunity. Adrian set the letters aside and crossed to her chair, dropping a kiss on top of her head. How she's concluded this from one dramatic declaration, I can't fathom. Perhaps because you knelt in her drawing room and professed your love before half of society. I suppose that might have contributed. Adrian settled into his chair across from her. Are you opposed to attending? Charlotte considered. 6 months ago, the thought of facing London society would have filled her with dread. But things were different now. She was different now. Or rather, she had remembered who she had always been. The woman who rejected unsuitable proposals. The woman who walked out of humiliating teas with her head high. The woman who had the courage to forgive and to love. I think we might attend, she said. It could be amusing. Then we shall. Adrian picked up his book, but before opening it, he said, Charlotte? Yes? Do you ever regret it? Accepting my proposal? Marrying me under such unusual circumstances? Charlotte set down her own book and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hand. Do you want the honest answer? He smiled slightly. Always. I regret that we wasted weeks dancing around each other when we could have been honest from the start. I regret the pain we both endured because of fear and past wounds. She squeezed his hand. But I don't regret marrying you. Not for a single moment. Because it brought me here. To this house, to this library, to this life. To you. Adrian pulled her up into his lap, and Charlotte went willingly, settling against his chest as his arms wrapped around her. I love you, he said simply. My brilliant, stubborn, honest wife. I love you, Charlotte replied. My secretive, literary, unexpectedly romantic husband. He laughed, a sound that had become far more common over the past months, and kissed her temple. Outside, the city continued its ceaseless movement. Carriages rattled past, merchants called their wares, and somewhere a church bell chimed the hour. But here, in this room filled with books and afternoon light, Charlotte and Adrian remained still. Two people who had found each other despite fear, despite deception, despite all the ways the world tried to categorize and separate them. They had promised each other honesty. They had promised each other respect. Neither had promised love. But love, Charlotte had learned, was not something one promised. It was something one chose, again and again, in 1,000 small moments, and a few extraordinary ones. And in that library in Clerkenwell, surrounded by words and warmth and the quiet certainty of being truly seen, Charlotte knew she would choose Adrian every time. Not the Earl, not the title, not the fortune or the estates or any of the things society deemed important. Simply the man who had given her a library, asked her opinion about curtains, and taught her that being loved for who you truly were was worth more than all the grandeur in England.